Hello, everyone. My name is LBK, and this is King Pair Podcast. Now, Sri Lanka has won the Asia Cup, and finally, a team has won in Dubai after batting first. So, first of all, Stuff, how are you doing? And second, is Sri Lanka great again?
Could be doing better if Pakistan had won the final, but oh well, we take what we can get. Is Sri Lanka great again? well, we'll have to see where they go from here, but this is a good start.
I mean, there's Chris Silverwood, there's Kusal Mendes, and I mean, he's great, although his temperament is not really that. We know what has happened with him. Also, Bhanuka Rajpaksha is really good. There's Dilshan Madhushanka, so there looks to be a lot of talent there. But I mean, the obvious question is, do we see them doing well as the same unit in other places? I mean, also this is more or less the template for the subcontinent, and they have done well at home in UAE. But do we see them doing well in Australia?
I mean, I definitely expect them to make it out of their first round group. They'll probably do well in the Super 12s, but I don't see them making the semis in Australia, and that's totally okay. They don't need to. They don't need to win everything back to back to back right after having their first decent run of success in a while. It's all about building up, and you do see the positive signs coming out of them. Still, they're still not the finished article. They will get better, and just having these sorts of things, which shows that they are making progress along the way, it can only be a good thing. Their biggest issue right now, I say, would probably be fast bowling. Like they have some decent fast bowlers that have done quite well, and they managed to win this without their best fast bowler, Dushmanta Chamira. But I think it still could be a little better. You don't need 5 Malingas or whatever, but you need some more experienced bowlers, some more bowlers that jump out at you as being properly elite. Some fast bowlers that jump out at you as being properly elite. I don't think Sri Lanka really have that. They're getting there, and maybe they'll find one soon enough. But I think that's
There's
probably their biggest weakness right now.
yeah, and there's these kinds of tournament. Every team has had one of these kind. At least the ones that have won them. That you get your bad game out real early, and like Sri Lanka had against Afghanistan, and it seems like everything comes together really well. I mean, as you said, they did not have Chamira, so even though it looked like they're going to miss Chamira, they found Madhushanka. Finally, Kushal Mendes found form, and everything seemed to come together. And finally, Rajpaksha and spinners did the job really well. So it did look like one of those tournaments, right?
We've talked about this before, where Sri Lanka has a decent squad. It's not as bad as some of the other ones. I think player for player, it's not as good as India or Pakistan squad that came into this tournament. But everyone was playing about as well as they could. Everyone was playing to a good role that suited them, a role that they were experienced with, a role that they did well. And after that disastrous first game against Afghanistan, which again we talked about earlier, we don't think that was the norm for them. It was more of an exception, a freakishly poor performance. And they've shown that ever since. They've done reasonably well with bat and ball in every game. They've won every game since the game against Afghanistan. And now they've made it all the way. It's a huge win.
How well do you remember our Asia Cup preview episode, by the way?
I think I remembered reasonably well enough. Sri Lanka was the one we talked about the least, but we did talk about them a little.
And do you know who were our picks for the team that would win the tournament?
Yeah, I said Pakistan. Gosi said Pakistan. You said India. But I do remember saying that I think Sri Lanka could make the final.
Actually, I said Sri Lanka would win this.
Oh, you did?
Yes, that's why I asked. It is always nice when you say something and it comes true. But yeah, I mean, talking about Sri Lanka, you know, every time you look at Sri Lanka, there seems to be a lot of potential. But I mean, as we have talked about, we have talked about almost all of their players, right? So, do you think it is just sometimes the point, just a matter of things coming well together as they came here, or do they still need a lot of work in general as well?
I mean, they definitely need some work. They're not a perfect team by any stretch, but yeah, they filled a lot of their problem areas. Just ever since that 2014 double where they won the Asia Cup and the World Cup back to back, they've been on the downswing. They've had trouble replacing Sangha, Murali, Jayawardene Dilshan, Malinga, Kulasekara, all these guys that brought them, I think it was 8 finals in 8 years or something between ICC events and the Asia Cup. Uh, and again, we talked about this before. But they had huge player turnover in the years since 2015 to 2021, 2022. They, you know, debuted a bunch of players and tossed out a bunch of players, and now they're sort of coming together ever since, I'd say, since the Durban tests of 2019, since they won Durban and Port Elizabeth, the test series win in South Africa. Yeah, they're slowly getting somewhere, and now we saw with this tournament they won the whole thing. They have tangibly are getting somewhere. They have a trophy to show for it, and a lot of that success is probably, it's not all on they threw in a bunch of young kids and found gold all at the same time. Like, not all of these players are 18, 19. They have quite a few. They have a big range of ages in this team. And a lot of them, I don't think any of these players, well, most of them haven't debuted in the last couple of years. They debuted a while ago, then went out of the team and then came back. And I think that's probably a testament to, whatever systems they have in Sri Lanka, the club cricket structure, the domestic structures, whatever ways they have to get these players playing matches, and also a bit of a testament to the selectors as well, where they do bring players back after they've been discarded. They're not tossed into the discard pile forever, like you sometimes see in a lot of other countries, like with Pakistan. And it tends to happen if you get dropped, you're out in the wilderness for a long time and there's no route back. Whereas with Sri Lanka, they have done quite well with bringing players back once they've been able to grow and evolve a little bit more. And just reaching 27 and being out of the side, that's not the end of the world. There's still a route for you back. And that's something Sri Lanka have done very well here. And now they have a trophy to show for it.
Now that you have talked about Pakistan, I have a question for you. So, has a team ever looked so out of shape after making a final in a tournament like Pakistan has? I mean, except Rizwan and maybe the Pacers, pretty much. You can also involve Shadab in it, but looks like everyone else is kind of you know trying to find a rhythm, but has not been able to find one till now.
I mean, it's not the worst final performance I've ever seen. I've definitely seen a lot of worse ones. But yeah, it sort of feels like a lot of problems all came to a head at the same time. And unlike with games against Afghanistan, the game against India, there wasn't one or two players performing a rescue act to paper over all the cracks. Yeah, Babra's been in poor form. Some of the spinners, okay, well, no, Shadab has probably been the best players, though not the spinners, but some of the pacers have looked out of rhythm sometimes. And the middle order just doesn't get much of a chance to do anything. And Fakhar as well has also been incredibly out of form. And yeah, it's just a lot of problems all coming together, like all hitting the fan at the same time. Yeah, it wasn't a great performance in that final. Definitely think the whole team will be disappointed. I But again, like, it's not the worst final performance I've ever seen. It's not even the worst one in an Asia Cup in the last 10 years.
No, actually, I mean, the performance in the final was not that bad. Actually, I mean, they had Sri Lanka at 58 for 5. I more or less meant it in a broad sense of the tournament itself. I mean, it seemed like there's the whole memory of the goldfish thing. That once Naseem Shah hit those two sixes, everyone seemed to forget what had happened in the game. I guess because for one thing, obviously Pakistan did some things wrong in the match, but the way they approached the target against Afghanistan showed a lot. I guess. I mean, they were just trying to maybe send in a hitter and get the target done with, and they kept doing it until they were almost dead. And I don't think it is a good mentality even in a game where the target is low, and probably at one point they might have thought, okay, the boundaries are short, so ultimately someone is going to get the hit in. So that was really bad from what I see.
Yeah, again, like it was, you know, Kushdil and Asif, they're supposed to be the designated hitters. Iftikhar's supposed to be the designated hitter. None of them came off at all this tournament, aside from the game, aside from the wins. It goes without saying, right? Like if the team performs better in wins than they do in losses, um, and yeah, like you're never gonna. The point of a designated hitter is that sometimes they'll come off, sometimes they won't. And he didn't come off in either game against Sri Lanka. They didn't come off in the defeat to India. Um, and they didn't like all three of them didn't come off together against the win against India, the win against Afghanistan. They came off separately. And yeah, like it's a difficult thing, right? Because Pakistan doesn't play that many T20 internationals. They don't get the chance all the time to give players experience with the roles. And when you go into a tournament, all you can do is just hope they come off on the day. Uh, and yeah, like unlike India, right, where they don't, the PSL is great, but a lot of the players they don't play in the same sort of role in the PSL as they do in the national team. And also, it's not as many matches, and also the PSL was in February, so it doesn't really help that much for judging form now. And like there are there's a lot that could be done, but we're coming up on a World Cup now, and I think we just have 7 games before the World Cup. I don't remember if the Tri Series in New Zealand is before or after the T20 World Cup. Yeah, it's either 7 games or 13 games, and it's probably going to be the same squad going. That gets picked for England for the England series. It's going to be the same squad going to that goes to the World Cup. So there isn't that much time to try anything or anyone new now.
One thing, I mean, one issue that has been kind of prevalent with Pakistan for a long time now, even the good parts, I mean, the things that have been going well for them, recently, like Babar's form or Rizwan's form. I think we have already talked about this, and we everyone keeps on harping on that. That someone like Rizwan, who rather starts slow and then tries to gather pace, it is really good when it works. But seems like from what we see in the first game against India and this final, looks like looks really bad in retrospect when it does not come off. Like it not, I mean, it did not come off yesterday, and it looked like it was not the right approach for yesterday's game.
Yeah, so I was brutal against Rahul when he did this against Hong Kong. And like it's different. I'd say it's slightly different for Rizwan and for Babar than compared to Rahul or Rohit because the batting coming after them isn't as tried and tested as India's middle order are. I like Pakistan's strategy is basically top three, two of the top three bat for 15 overs, and then the lower order takes you however far. And if it comes off, it comes off great. You get a decent score, and the bowling it's usually good enough for the bowlers to defend. And like if it's a really batter-friendly pitch, then the top three will score quicker, and that's usually still good enough. Like we saw in South Africa a few times. And that's the game plan that Pakistan plays with, and it usually works off. Sometimes it doesn't. Didn't work off this tournament because Babar and Fakhar were both in poor form, and I think Fakhar probably should have been dropped earlier in the tournament, but instead he ended up playing every game. Like we saw it at the last World Cup as well, right? Where the game plan did work because Babar Rizwan were scoring runs, Fakhar was scoring runs, and then the middle order, lower order, Asif Khushil, they did come off and they did have these cameo innings that won games from nowhere. Most notably against that win against Afghanistan, but also a few other games all tournament where it felt like the faith placed in them had been paid off, and since then it hasn't really happened. But Pakistan doesn't have that many players to fulfill this specific role, so at this point, coming up on a World Cup, all you can really do is just stick with them.
So, as a Pakistan fan, what do you think is the way out from here? I mean, what changes do you see, and how do you overall rate this performance?
It was a good overall tournament performance, where the parts of the team that did work worked, and the parts that didn't work didn't work. But more often than not, it was able to get the job done, and we did make the final. So it's not all that bad, and it's not losing to Sri Lanka twice, and it's not the end of the world. For the World Cup, we'll be talking about this more in a later video. After more when we're closer to the World Cup and after the last few practice games have been played. Yeah, I would like to see Hyder Ali get a longer run in the side, probably in place of Fahar. Uh, I would like to see someone else in place of Iftikhar, because I don't think Iftikhar is going to cut it. But someone just has to grab that chance, and we'll probably be given that chance against England, and they will have to grab it. I'm not sure who, but they'll toss in someone. They always toss in someone, and someone usually makes the most of it for a little bit. So hopefully that comes off. Bowling, I think, is fine. Usman Qadir's form could be better, but if he's going to come in as the backup spinner, it's not the worst thing in the world. Shadab and Nawaz have been excellent as both spinning options and lower order batting options. Fast bowlers have been excellent. There's a whole battery now, so it gives you some more flexibility with who you're using and when. Overall, I don't think we're going to win the World Cup. I don't think we're one of the favorites, but I wouldn't count out another semifinal run. But again, the World Cup's still a month and a bit away.
I kind of feel like India had exactly the opposite tournament from what Pakistan had. Like India did not make it to the final, but unironically, they kind of had the good time with overall players. I guess. I mean, a lot of their players were able to finally get some time and catch some form. I guess, like Rohit, Virat, and even we were able to see Ashdeep in some tense situations, and he did well.
Yeah, India had an interesting tournament where they lost the two important games to Pakistan and Sri Lanka in the second group stage. But they annihilated Afghanistan in that last game, and they had a good game against Hong Kong in the first round, a good game against Pakistan in the first round. Yeah, Rohit Kohli making some runs, it's helpful. Bhuvaneshwar getting wickets in that last game is helpful, and India did have the leading run scorer and the leading wicket taker of the tournament, largely based off of that dead rubber against Afghanistan. But runs are runs, wickets are wickets. And Arshdeep was quite impressive when he bowled final overs, less impressive when he bowled earlier in the innings. But again, like this is all part of the learning process, right? The team's learning, when to use who and who to use when. And if they learn those lessons, that it could really help at the World Cup. But we'll see.
I mean,
They have two more series before the World Cup, don't they? Yes, New Zealand and South Africa.
Obviously, there's the point that it is kind of a general consensus that batting first in UAE has been kind of hard, and it is relatively easier to bat when you know the target down there. And India kind of got the chance to do it what, three times, four times. So in general, it looks like they've got a lot of practice doing this in relatively tougher times. And as obviously we know, Australia is one place where stroke making is relatively easy once you go through that early swing. So do you think this is going to help them down there when things are relatively easier?
Okay, we get into the toss T20 things again, aren't we? Like, I don't think it's.
Not really. It is not really a top. I mean, we have seen yesterday. I think my whole point around that was, if you have to win in Dubai after batting first, I think you have to basically put your opposition down in first 10 overs or so, because unless you're down with you say 100 or 110 runs, there's a good chance that you'll not be able to defend unless you know your opposition makes a mess of it completely.
I mean, this is the same thing with like everywhere. I don't think batting first in the UAE is any more difficult compared to batting first in other places, especially with this tournament because it wasn't that humid. You don't really have the dew factor. It was just, uh, the teams batting first and bat as well as they could. The teams batting second as well. They didn't bat as well as they could, but they pulled out some close wins at the end because they knew the target. And that tends to happen when you get closer games. It's a little easier to pace yourself when the pressure's against you if you know exactly what you need to do. So I don't think batting first in the UE was particularly that difficult. It wasn't that much harder than batting second. Like, yeah, like we saw in most of the games. The only really easy chase was the first Afghanistan Sri Lanka game, where Afghanistan won in 10 overs. So that's not really down to the conditions. It's down to one team being completely outmatched. Um, and yeah, like Sri Lanka weren't 53 for 5 in the first innings of the final because they batted first. They were 53 for 5 in the first innings of the final because the Pakistani bowlers had a good opening spell, while the Sri Lankan batters did not. Now, you wouldn't say that Pakistan were whatever they were 40 for 4 after a while because batting second is difficult. It was because they didn't bat well. So, as they go to Australia, I don't think the lessons are going to be okay, we batted well in a hard place, we can bat well in an easier place. It's just going to be, we batted well in a T20, we can bat well in another T20.
I mean, that is fine, but actually, my point was a little further up than you thought. Because in few of the games, we actually did see ball getting a bit stuck, in the pitch and coming off really slow on the bat. So that was my point. That it was actually tough to bat in the first innings, like not that it was relatively easier in the second. Even in the second innings, the ball got kind of stuck every time bowler slowed it down. I think we saw that in India Pakistan game, especially where as soon as India started bowling slow, it was tough to bat even in the second innings around the death. So obviously there is a lot of issues with the in batting in general in UAE as well. Not saying it is the first innings or the second innings largely, but I think we can say it has become kind of a mental factor for the teams to bat first, given that I mean they are also the cricketers are also ultimately humans and they know what the record has been in, especially in Dubai recently, and I think that plays upon their minds as well. So that was all I was trying to say.
Yeah, it is a mental thing. And yeah, like as I go to Australia, well, we don't really know what the pitches will be for the World Cup specifically. Um, but yeah, like they will be, if you've made runs recently, you'll be more confident about your ability to make runs going forward. Again, like I don't think it's specifically a UAE versus Australia thing. It's just a general T20 form thing. If you've made runs recently, be more confident to make runs again in the future. If you're struggling to make runs, you'll struggle to make runs again in the future. Owen Morgan didn't get out for a duck in an innings where England made 498 because the pitch was difficult. He got out for a duck because he played poorly and he'd also been in poor form. His confidence wasn't there. There's a ton of factors that leads to that. And again, like going into the Australian World Cup, like it's hard to predict how the pitches will be because Australia hasn't hosted that many T20s at these grounds lately, and also you never really know what'll happen with the pitches once it becomes an ICC event because the management of the pitches changes. They actually have their own groundsmen handling it. Like we saw with the 2019 World Cup, where England was a very high scoring country. All those venues are very high scoring venues in the preceding few years. But then at the 2019 World Cup itself, it was a very bowler friendly tournament. So yeah, and I don't want to say like we can't predict things at all, because then it sort of defeats the whole point of whatever we're doing. But try not to get, I'll say, like, try not to get too attached to preconceived notions before we even get there.
That's true. So that is it for today, and I'll see you next time.
All right, see you. Goodbye.
Bye.